Originality can never be fully achieved. We are in the age now where that is more true than ever. But even 1,000 years ago, originality was almost impossible. Think about literature. Even the Iliad or Homer's The Odyssey, which were very ancient books, before Common Era kind of books. They had inspiration from mythologies, probably even cave paintings, things like that. Culture, spoken tales that resided in almost every culture, but never had an original author. This is an example in literature. It doesn't go back to a certain point, and I'm sure logically it does. There must have been some first story, but realistically every other story has expanded on that and been adapted in some way. If you look at every kind of European literary genre, Gothic, modernist, and art, visual arts, they all have these kind of genres. They all have these kind of styles. They're all adapted from each other. They all change. They all follow on from each other in a kind of path. Originality isn't just, okay, here we have an orange and here we have an apple. These are two completely different things. There's a gradient. Things don't come about from nothing. It's almost impossible to do that. Think about planes. We didn't think of planes from nothing. They were based on things that we'd already seen. Birds. So in some ways you could say the most original author in the world is evolution. But even that comes from very minute small changes as a result of the environment. My point is, if you are creating and you have a writer's block, an artist's block, a poet's block, whatever kind of block there is, a musician's block, I'm sure there's all sorts. You have to remember that finding patterns in your work to past pieces of art does not make your art a copy. Of course, there's a fine line between copying and inspiration, but nearly every piece of art takes some inspiration. Philosophers have their influences. So do filmmakers. And in reality, their influences make their work better. Because they take things that they find good and they leave things out and they add their own little fine tunings. And they make their own sets of philosophy. And there's many more examples I could give, but you already know art is an extensive field, and it applies to all kinds of art. Originality can't be fully achieved, but it can be strived for, and people need to think about originality in a different way, in a way that consists of combining different kinds of art they are inspired by, and also adding their own thoughts. The Handmaid's Tale, written by Margaret Atwood. Her story, at first glance, seems completely and utterly original. But if you do a little research, you'll find out that the society she used in her world building was based on Puritan culture, which I believe was around in the US in about the 18 or 1700s. And many other parts, the handmaids, different policies that upheld Gileadian regime were all based on things that she'd seen in the real world, which is fascinating. But it proves my point that this hadn't come from thin air, this had happened. And while that's going down a political conversation, she'd taken things that she'd seen that had inspired her, and also her dystopian literature writing style. That kind of genre was inspired by people like Orwell and Huxley. This didn't come from nowhere, and I'm sure if you find out Orwell's influences, there will be hundreds. And if you want to think about it in a different way, purple, for example, wasn't just found. People took red and blue and they put them together. Purple was kind of an adaptation of the two. People need to redefine their ideas of originality, because it really should be about using inspiration and adding your own ideas to it.